52 seconds left to go. So,
right.
Ladies and gentlemen, kids of all ages, it's time once again. It's Thursday night. It's the Mattriarchy. I am your host, Matt Reese, coming to you from sunny and balmy Scottsbluff, Nebraska. Nobody else but me was here today, but I tell you, it was a muggy scorcher out there today. I am very glad to be in the basement of my house right now. Tonight I am joined by, oh my goodness, Doug, I forgot, Curtis.
Right, you got it. It's okay.
I almost called you by a different Doug. I was going through
There's so many Dougs.
I was going through the list of Dougs I know, and I'm like, no, that's not that one. No, it's not that.
I'm gonna ignore it.
His phone is going off. The best show ever.
Not mine.
Anyway, Doug Curtis is the artist behind Jeremy Lott's Mystery Men.
Yes.
Movie Men.
Yes.
Got the wrong name of it. As well as the webcomic The Flying Ferret. Am I remembering that right?
Correct.
I did not make notes. I did not make notes at all today. And Doug's been on before, second time. Thanks for coming on, Doug.
Yeah, good to be here. It's been a while. So
yeah, it has been. It's been since 2019.
Yeah,
November something. Yeah.
I don't do this too often, but I enjoy coming on. So thanks.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that. And for the first time on the show, webcomic veteran. Well, I guess we all really are. We've been doing it longer than 10 years, right? But anyway, Mr. Neilsama, the creator of Dacian. Thanks for coming on.
My pleasure. Never been on the show before. Glad to be on.
Yeah. Yes. And tonight's theme is, why am I still doing webcomics?
That's a good fucking question.
It is an excellent question. Are we going to unravel this?
You're not.
So what I want to do is I want you guys, we're going to kind of go around and talk about our comics, what got us into them, and then we'll kind of jump off from there. So, Neil, since you've never been here before, you go first. Tell us about how you got started doing webcomics, what your comic's about, and where people can find it, since I was not thoughtful enough to put it in the description.
Well, it is Dacian, the superhero webcomic, at Dacian.com. That's Dasien, because I, for some reason, picked a name that I always have to spell, because nobody knows how to say it. Nobody knows how to spell it. Obviously it's a superhero webcomic, but it's more of like it's kind of evolved over time. It started out as this big, like, epic, this is gonna be like a big fight scene type comic, and then it's sort of turned into like more I don't want to say slice of life, because I hate slice of life, but it's become more social, the way the characters interact. It's kind of become like a way for me to just make fun of how people interact. And actually, what I've really gotten into lately is like doing shorter stories where it's not like this big epic storyline. I'll just do like 15, 20 pages of the comic, and it could be about superhero stuff. It could also be about just like wacky nothing. I did like a Scooby-Doo episode. I did a Christmas up. I did a crossover with SGVY. It's like Cian and Yuki Save Christmas, and it's stupid, and I love it. It's kind of all over the place. When it started, it was the pacing is. I'll be perfectly honest. First 200 pages, the pacing is really bad, and then it starts really slow, and then the pacing starts to compress, and then like after that, that's when the short stories start, and it starts to become a lot more readable and a lot more fun. I'm not very good at describing my own comic, other than just rambling like that. I've done other things. I've done like Crossover Lord. I did that with Rima Shepherd of I can't remember the name of his comic, and also Al Schroeder of Mind Mistress. And a couple other people were on that as well. That was a project that was like 2 years, where it's just like a whole bunch of webcomic characters come together to fight a big bad guy. And it's just kind of a ridiculous story.
That had to be kind of a mess to kind of piece it all together, huh? Or did
it was
just solely your story?
I'm sorry, what?
Is it like it was solely your story? I mean, that you just used their characters. Did they have much input on?
No, we kind of like came up with a story by committee, which if I had to do it over, I wouldn't do it again like that. I think I would. I think I would like put one of us in charge to be the little Hitler and run the whole show instead of like trying to organize the try to herd kittens as it was. It was an interesting project, and yeah, if I had to do it over, I wouldn't do it the way we did it, but it was fun, and it's kind of it's an interesting read. I'll say that.
Cool.
Yeah.
When did you start doing Dacian?
Well, there's two origin points. I actually started it in 2002, and then I hated it so much that I started over. So around 2005, 2006, there was just a total reboot in it, and changed a lot of the art, changed the coloring, because even the current version, like the old pages, the coloring is really bad. Like it just didn't really have respect for natural colors. Yeah, I started around 2002, and then intermittently I would go on hiatuses and come back and do like a whole bunch of pages, and then I'd disappear again. So it's been like this on and off thing for like 15 years.
Oh, I can relate.
Yeah.
Yeah, I can as well.
Yeah.
Doug, talk to me about talking about Flying Fair a little bit. Let's go for that.
Well, Flying Ferret started as a concept of a friend of mine made up. We were just joking about Wolverine and just kind of doing a parody comic, and it just kind of evolved as we mashed Superman, Wolverine, Batman all kind of together, and we drew this sketch up. And he's supposed to have guns like pop out of his out of his forearms, like Wolverine's supposed to have knives come out of his fists, So, but my friend just kind of dropped it, and he said, you do something with it. And about 2 years later, after my daughter was born, and I had nothing to do, and I just got in a computer, and I said, well, let me try a webcomic. I mean, this is way back in 1996. And so I tell people, it's like, were there even web pages? Wasn't it just emailing and, it's like machine code? It's like, no, there was graphics. There were like, it was real crude, but I had it up, and yeah, it just kind of evolved and grew, and just kind of this angsty, angry superhero. And it's funny how he's evolved and changed too. He's not as angry and angsty as he used to be. I was really wanted to go in this one direction, and then I went in this other direction. So I'm sure you guys can relate to characters changing.
I've read the first. I've read the first. I don't know, maybe two or three storylines of Flying Ferret. I haven't gotten as far as I wanted to with it, but the world in which he inhabits seems to lend itself toward, that shift in his character. I think a little bit. Yeah, because it's pretty zany.
And my brother and I, my brother, he kind of did a spin-off too. He created a character called Rabid Rabbit, and he was kind of a Punisher kind of character. So there's a crossover story too in there. If you go through them, you'll come across too. And sometimes I feel like my brother writes Flying Ferret better than I do. He kind of gets the zany concept of the more anger issues. I think my brother has more anger issues than I do. And, and so I found that amusing, but yeah, I kind of wish I'd like to go back to more my zany kind of humor and stuff. In fact, I've kind of hit a point now in my storyline where I actually can go back and do that. And I think I'm going to kind of gear things back to the way it was. And it's going to be kind of a spoof on Rebirth and all that stuff too.
So, first of all, you've been doing it roughly since '96, intermittently. I think everybody does webcomics pretty much does it intermittently.
Yes.
Unless you're Scott Kurtz.
Right.
Actually, I haven't followed PvP in so long. I don't know if he's like consistent or not. I have no idea.
I only read him up to a point, and I kind of stopped. Yeah. I
just kind of got too busy about 2004. So. Actually, you know what it was? They were releasing them through Image for a while.
Yes. Yep.
and I had a subscription. I was getting them through Image for a while, and then we ran into some high rocks in life, and kind of had to cancel that, and I just didn't go back.
Yeah.
That's actually what it was. I just was like, we had to stop something out of life, and it was our sub comics at the time, and I just didn't go back. So
I wonder how long that lasted. That his stint with Image. I have a few issues, but I have no idea.
I have to look it up. I don't know.
Yeah.
But yeah. So how often do you update, Doug?
I really try weekly, but yes, I've had periods where I went almost 3 years without updating. So that I was very embarrassed and shamed and guilt. And finally, I came to the realization, you know what? I'm not getting paid for this. This is just for fun. If I update, I'll update. I won't apologize for it anymore. It's just readers are going to have to deal with it. I don't know how many I've lost. How many readers I've lost. I have no idea. It's been nice to switch over to Webtoons now, because now I actually know the number of readers, and that kind of like creates inspiration to keep it updated, But
so were you doing everything just on your own website before?
I did, yeah. I had a friend who hosted me for quite a while, and he helped me fix the 1996 webcomic about 2002, I think. He helped me fix it all up, and he says, you got to do this, you got to format it like that, and he just kind of set me straight on how to set it up. And before I was just doing like panel by panel, so you just would scroll up. Here's a panel, here's a panel, here's a panel. It wasn't like an actual comic book page, and I'm sure it had to be annoying. Probably would work nowadays for phones with people scrolling and stuff, but it wasn't real effective back then. So, but yeah, so bless Eric Bouchard. I should throw a shout out to him. So my French Canadian friend.
There you go.
So Neil, how often do you update?
Well, I'm going out about 3 years. I had a medical emergency a couple years back, so I totally stopped the comic, and I have not picked it up since then. But like I said, it's intermittent, so it's really hard to give a real answer to that. Like sometimes I'll come back and I'll just have loads of pages. I'm sorry, I'm watching my sister's dog, so you're gonna hear an emphysemic dog every now and then. Shush.
Dogs looking after here.
Man. But anyway, yeah, I don't. It's really hard to give a real. I got someone at the door. I can't believe this. I'll be right back. I'm sorry.
Well, that's fine. We just had a new guest pop in, so I'll pump him for information. We'll pretend like it was all part of the plan. So before we get on to Twitless, thanks for coming on. Doug, it says you were too early for your time. Star Storyteller in the chat.
Yes, I was.
Yeah, and yes, Sick, the dog has emphysema, as Neil just mentioned. So there you have that. I guess I didn't realize dogs get emphysema because I've never seen a dog smoke.
Right. I want to see that.
Maybe that's just my bias. Oh, I don't. It's a way to
cartoon dog. Let's do cartoon dog. Yeah.
Cartoon dog. So yeah. Twitless.
Hey, how's it going?
I just noticed that your handle does not say Twitless today.
Yeah, I'm just being silly.
I thought you may have you're like, no, I've shed that identity. I've reached my next form.
Well, that's what we do nowadays, right? We just change our identities whenever we want.
I don't.
These are my preferred pronouns.
I don't. Yeah, there you go. So anyway, we're going around, and since you're newest here, tell us a little bit about Super School.
What about it?
Well, when did you start doing it, and why? And how often do you update?
Good questions. All right, so I think it's been about 4 years or so, but we started it. We started working on it a lot earlier, and originally, I think my artist Taylor and I, we were going to do. We were very ambitious, and we went, hey, let's try to do a superhero and supervillain a story, and let's try to make it like an animated cartoon. Because he was big into animation, still is. But at the time, he thought he really wanted to animate like by hand, which is a lot of work. So we actually recorded some voice lines, and we had Taylor's brother actually do some music for it, and I wrote a script. We had all this stuff made, and then, like I said, just kind of petered out a bit because doing a full animated series is not something that's very easy for people to do. So we kind of sat on some stuff for a while. I think we wrote did a couple comic strips, and then it sat for several years. And then I went to a comic book convention, and people were just, doing comics, and I just got inspired by jealousy, actually. I saw everybody else doing it, and I went, why can't I do this? So I went to him and I said, today we're doing this. And so I put some money down. We bought a website, and we just started updating about twice a week. And we've been very consistent. We've been hitting the twice a week update for about 4 years. So,
oh, nice.
Yeah, that's real awesome. We used to do back when I don't know. But yeah, we used to do twice a week on Forces, but that's a real hard thing. Which I guess this is a good segue for me to talk about my comic. We started we originally workshopped the idea, my buddy Chris Lawton and I, back in 2003, to pitch to Mad Magazine, who did not want it. And more's the pity for them. But because it's amazing. It's amazing. But what it is A Force of Good and Evil is the story of two lifelong best friends who, in their junior year of high school, end up taking an aptitude test at their school. And then, based on the scores of their aptitude test, they get shuffled away, and Chad the bully gets sent to superhero school, and Greg the goody two-shoes nerd gets sent to supervillain school. And so it's a fish out of water teen dramedy about these kids in extreme rural America trying to learn how to be superheroes and or supervillains. And we've been doing that. We tried to pitch it to Mad, and then in 2000, between 03 and 05, Chris and I went through 2 years of collecting rejection letters from Marvel and DC and Image and Dark Horse, and eventually we decided, we're just going to do our own thing. And we took our pitches that we were trying to put together, and we realized there were common threads, and we built a universe out of these threads. And one of those stories was Forces of Good and Evil, which was the funny take on our more serious universe. And we decided to put that together because neither of us could really draw, but we could both fake draw. And so we decided to go ahead and do that as a webcomic to try to get people to see what our universe was about for free, and to see if they would be interested in checking it out more. And webcomics are kind of like a drug. Once you can see your imagining, you can see your world on paper or on the internet, as it were. Suddenly, you want more of it, and you start building these characters and building these worlds that they inhabit, and seeing how they play off of each other, and
Right.
You get hooked on it. So at least I did. So that's just been an inextricable part of my life since then. And we just recently we started on Comics Genesis actually the 3rd of January 2006 was our first update. And then we ended up moving over to our own web server, which we've been on since then. We're on our 3rd or 4th version of the site through different providers. And just last summer, we relaunched our whole archives 2 pages a week, starting in last March or May, I can't remember which it was. And we just went through, and we are nearly caught up for all 500 pages of content.
Wow.
That we've done over the last decade. So that's the story we're at, and we're really close. But yeah, on our Patreon, I just published the final page, the epilogue page to our last. It's not the last story, but it's the most recent story, Panic at the Ren Fair, and and that's actually I will brag on it. It's called the Elf Only Epilogue, and it features some of the characters from Josh Sortelli's Elf Only Inn, and in continuity, a moment that bridges the gap between missing pieces in his comic and the end of my comic. So, because our comic is set in 2005 right now, so it's at a fixed point in time. So yeah, so that's what we do. That's what Forces is all about. I'm not currently doing the art on it. Our pencil artist is a guy named Rolf Gardot on this story. He's a retired gentleman who lives in a community nearby me in western Nebraska, who grew up in the Marvel age, reading Spider-Man, Fantastic Four, all this stuff right off the shelf, and always wanted to get into comics. And then when he retired, he decided he was just going to do what he wanted, and that was draw. And so he approached me and said, "I heard you make comics, and I'm willing to work for free." And I said, "Well then." so Rolf's been doing Forces for a couple of years for us. Really appreciate the work he's put into it. He's also the pencil artist on a print project that we are working on behind the scenes, and we hope to have that ready to go and by the end of the year. So
nice, cool.
Yeah. Also joining us is Carl Toons. Is definitely, I hope you don't mind me pointing this out here, the youngest person, both in terms of his actual age and in his career in webcomics. But he's worked on a couple. Go ahead and talk to us about your history of webcomics, Carl.
All right. I started quite a while back, like a year or two ago, with a small webcomic project called Wholegrave that kept spiraling, and the problem with that story is that I kind of made it up as I went along. Consequently, the story just started getting bigger and bigger, and the ideas I was playing with started getting bigger and bigger. What started out as a pretty simple pulp comedy adventure story about a wealthy former adventure entrepreneur and a doctor who were just going for a nice air balloon ride and accidentally getting caught up in a battle between two air pirates became this really weird story about being trapped in a supernatural landscape populated by monsters and all sorts of creatures and ghosts, and ruled by I didn't even get to that part yet. It was going to be ruled by the king of them all, an undead pirate named Bacchus Wholegrave. So, therefore, the story was named Wholegrave because that place was always supposed to be named after that pirate guy. The ghost stuff kind of came later, sort of went off the rails a bit, and I started to realize, this story, it's a cool idea, but I think I'm just, it's too much in the kitchen sink. So I decided, I'm not going to scrap it entirely, but I'm going to put it on the back burner for a bit. I'm going to develop that story a bit more while I'm working on another webcomic, because now I am currently working on the art for a webcomic with a friend of mine known as Matt McGibson, or MMC Jerkface on Twitter. He is the writer for a current webcomic project we're working on called Dragblade, a goofy fantasy comedy set in a sort of crazy / kind of dark but darkly humorous alternate past. The basic premise is that a knight is tasked with he's pretty diminutive, but he's tasked with a ridiculous task of killing a immortal crazy warlord from a Viking country. And we've done 3 chapters of that so far. I've done the art, he's done the writing. It's been a blast so far. He's a really funny guy, and so it lends itself well to humor. He's been really happy with my art, and at least as of when I started working on Dragblade, I've been pretty happy with my art as well. It's pretty fun working on a webcomic where I specifically don't have to worry so much about like the story and the plot as much as just getting to draw. And while I do dabble in story a bit, art and cartooning and character design are definitely my forte. So with Dragblade, you get to see that without any of me trying to figure out the finer details of storytelling. It's been a blast.
Yeah, in full whatever you want to call it, disclosure, Matt Gibson was the other Matt that co-founded the show back in the day. So back in 2018, Matt and I became Twitter acquaintances, and we're both Matts and have a lot in common. So we decided to do something, and it was this show. And that's why the Mattriarchy is his idea. The name of it was his idea. Doing a show was his idea, actually. So it's all his fault. He's not even. So, which I want you to get him back on sometime, but he's gotten so busy. That's
the way it is, you know. He's a bit less busy now, you know, with the pandemic.
Yeah, last time I left it, I said, dude, anytime you want to come on, just let me know, and he hasn't let me know, so.
Yeah.
But yeah, so, and how often do you guys update Dragblade?
We're trying to do it monthly at the very least, due to certain circumstances in Matt's life. Things have been a bit hectic, and so it might be delayed a little. Like the 4th chapter might be delayed just a little, but if we don't get it out this month, we will probably get it out around next month. It's pretty fun so far, from what I've read and from what I've worked on with the pages themselves.
Yeah, and you guys do a full chapter at a time.
Yeah, it's very different from the approach I was doing with Holgrave, where I'm just uploading like 3 pages per upload.
Yeah. So,
cool.
And I'm sorry, you're going to say Twitless?
I said cool.
Oh, okay, yeah. Yeah, I know. Twitless does his 2 pages a week, but they're strips, is basically like a newspaper strip, and we do a page at a time, usually with whatever we have. So, but yeah, and so yeah, that's the thing. So, we've kind of talked about how we started getting into getting into webcomics. So, Doug, what keeps you doing webcomics?
You called it an addiction, and I think it's more that it's a habit. You know, it just I don't know. I think the biggest thing is all these ideas in the head, and you want to get them out. You know, I do another webcomic called Slammer, and that one too has been stuck in my head. Another friend kind of came up with the concept. It was kind of a Star Wars, X-Men kind of thing. And that story just kind of formulated in my head over many, many years. I always intended to make a printed comic out of it, but it just seemed to work better on Webtoons. And it just has to be told. So it just has to come out. That's just kind of the way it is. You know, Flying Fair's the same way. I just had all these things I wanted to do. I had all these milestones, you know, hit this, and I pretty much have hit all the points now. So now I got to completely come up with all these new ideas now to keep going. So, which is kind of exciting to me. So yeah, it's an addiction, you know, just a habit, you know, I just keep doing it and you keep loving it. You just want to see where it goes.
So Neil, you've been on hiatus for a little while. I know that when we're in that position, and we're about to enter a hiatus on our projects because I wanted to really focus on some of our for print stuff, right? Because the webcomic's just such a time intensive thing. But I know I've been on hiatus before, and I know that when you're in the middle of it, it's for me, it's misery, right? Like the whole time, it's just like there's these voices, these stories, these characters that just they're constantly poking my subconscious to say, talk about me.
Right. They're almost like living people.
Yeah. You know, my work process is probably a lot different than a lot of people because I always have like huge batches of pages always like somewhere in the process of completion. Sorry, the dogs are distracting me. Where was it? Oh yeah, I always have like a huge batch of pages because the way my site works now, because I'm no longer on Comic Genesis, is that I can just put out several pages in a batch if I want to. So I can have like entire issues if I want to. So I'm like, well, screw a page a day. I might as well just like do a whole story all at once. So I've always got something. I've always got something saved, but I just walk away from it for long periods of time, and it takes me forever to get back to it. But I'm always writing something. I've always got like text files full of like little pieces of dialogue that I think are funny, or just story ideas that I think would be kind of neat. So I just like write down notes, and I've always got something, but it's just a matter of taking this huge batch of crap and making it something intelligible to finally put out. Like I said earlier, like I'll be on hiatus for like months and months and months, and then like I'll just explode with content all at once.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Do you ever write notes when you like try to look at them later and go, "What the hell was I writing? What was this freaking idea?"
Or like a Seinfeld episode.
Yes,
I've done that. I'm like, what the hell is this? I try to be as detailed as possible whenever I take notes.
With Dacian, do you have like an end game with that, or are you just gonna are you gonna just tell the story until you drop dead?
I do have an end game in mind for the core story. The main story is only like maybe like 30 issues. I'm up to like issue 12, I think. But I keep expanding it because I keep coming up with all these like shorter stories, and those end up taking priority because I like writing those better. So yeah, I do have an end game in mind. I don't know when I'm gonna get to it. I'll probably drop dead before I ever finish.
Oh man,
yeah,
I know
that's a
that.
fear.
With Forces, it's 2 years out of these kids' lives, right? There's their junior year and their sophomore and their senior year, and that's it. When they graduate, that story will be done. And I know other things that happen to these guys as part of our larger universe, but that's one aspect, one facet of this huge, massive, multi-generational story that is it's that we've our team is put together, and a lot of it's mine, and a lot of it's Chris's, and some of it's Barry's, and so there's this huge story, and I don't think at this point that I can live long enough to see all of it done. I think every writer has pretensions of telling that biggest story, but so we'll see if it really is that good. I don't know, or even that has that staying power.
I often tell people, when people ask me advice on doing webcomics, I always tell them to do the opposite of what I do. I started big, and what I should have done was start with little stories and work my way up.
Well, and I think that's an important skill too. One of the things that Chris and I worked on when we were trying to break into the big guys was really spent those couple of years, and the pitches that we'd send out and the scripts we had to back them up were 8-page, 12-page stories. And because if you could tell a compelling story in 12 pages, then you could tell a compelling story in 12 issues.
Mm-hmm.
There's a skill that goes with being able to really truncate yourself, and so we really think I still think that's important when it comes to webcomics. I think that it's really easy as a creator to just let yourself run on and on and on, but you got to have. But especially if you're doing a page a week or a page and update or whatever, you've got to be able to catch somebody with every page. Every page has to have a page turn. Every page has to have a sting.
Yeah.
And that's I think a skill that some people like miss for the sake of their big story. So like our big story is intended to be made up of hundreds of small stories, and so hopefully. If we do our job right, if you read our small stories, you would appreciate them, and if you read all of our small stories, then you get the big story. So,
I got to get back to finish reading what you've got up.
We are going to be going through, and I'm probably going to go through and colorize our archives in the next couple of years too. But because I have new fancy coloring tools that make it a lot easier, but it's still time intensive. Twitless, you work on, you've got a couple different projects under the belt, but with the webcomic specifically, with Super Schooled, do you guys have a big story in mind, or do you guys just make it up as you go?
I changed my mind on that. So it depends. I think my artist has more of an idea of like an end point. I had some ideas maybe. It's Super Schooled is a gag comic, first and foremost. So to me, I'll do it as long as it stays funny and fun to do. And then I don't know. I have some ideas of like, oh, let's do an Avengers Endgame style finale, and then part of me wants to just subvert that and do something really silly at the end. So I'm not sure.
Well, I mean, yours is a similar top theme material to ours. Not really themes, but materials are similar.
Yeah, you ripped me off really badly there. Yeah.
Back in 2003, in high school.
Even though you came out first.
So I'm going to tell this little story. This is totally selfish and off topic. But when we started doing it as a webcomic and we tried telling people about it online and tried telling people about it in person, try to get them over there, the number one thing that I got from people, right, was, oh, that's just like that Disney movie Sky High.
Yeah.
I was like, no, it's not. One, we did it first. Second of all, we have a villain school too, so it's different. Then now, you know, I've years later we kind of went off to do our own thing, and I re-entered social media to try to pitch it to new people back in 2018, 17, somewhere in there. And I tried telling people about my comic, and they're like, "Oh, it's just like My Hero Academia." Not just. It's a lot like that, but it's not just.
That's like Flying Fairy compared to the Tick a lot. It's like, I did precede it. It was a little bit of an inspiration. Hate to say that.
Yeah. Well,
I have a rule. I'm sorry. I have a rule that is never tell the reader what to do. But that's one instance where I almost want to do like never tell an artist that his work is like something else. Just don't do that.
And sometimes those shorthands are convenient because like they kind of help people kind of place what you're going for. Like when we used to tell people, it doesn't make sense anymore to people, but back in 2005, it was still a fresh enough memory where we said, so if you were to mash up the X-Men and Saved by the Bell, that's sort of kind of maybe a little bit what we're going for. But, you know, now people are like, Saved by the what? I don't know what you're talking about, Boomer.
Weird, even I know about Saved by the Bell.
I know you do. But
then again, I grew up watching reruns of junk.
Well, and you specifically seek out, like, weird stuff, right?
Yeah.
What do you think? Like one of the things that I'm gonna be that guy. But one of the things I love about your style, and one of the things I love about Holgrave so much, is it's just the marriage of like early 20th century American cartooning and mid 20th century Japanese cartooning, and Carl just smashes like Astro Boy and LZ Seeger's Popeye, just smashes them together and comes up with stuff. And,
okay, I gotta check this out.
Those are very similar, though. I've always thought of like early anime as being like a throwback to like the Popeye stuff, like just the way they cycle animation. It's very similar.
Yeah. I think you were saying. Correct me if I'm wrong on this, Carl. But weren't you telling me once that the creator of Astro Boy took a lot of notes from the Max Fleischer animation studio?
Yes, he did. Osamu Tezuka was in love with American animation and cartoons.
So, and Fleischer has, you know, there's that tradition is just thick with them. But I love your character designs for that very reason.
So in a weird sense, I guess you could say a lot of anime tropes date back to Fleischer cartoons.
Pretty much.
I think that's really fair.
Even
I
with Betty
think
Boop, when you think about it.
Yeah. Betty Boop is the original waifu, right?
Pretty much, exactly.
If I'm using the term right, I don't know.
Yes, that is the correct, proper usage of that term.
Look at me, clawing myself toward irrelevance. So, question now: what is it that we talked a little bit about that with Doug? And the idea what keeps you doing webcomics is that for what is it for you, Neil? What is it that keeps you? I know, like I said, you've been on hiatus for a bit, but you will return. I just can't see that not happening. What is it that keeps you coming back?
It's just fun to do. I'm not sure if I can answer it any other way. I've always been fond of art, and I've always been fond of well, I'm about to repeat myself. I'm very fond of cartoons. I grew up on Archie comics, and later graduated to like Adam Warren, and like got into anime. So I like to throw all that stuff together and like kind of like stir it around and come up with some sort of hodgepodge of all that crap. And that's kind of fun to me. I love doing that. And like I said, I like writing silly scenarios and telling jokes and all that stuff.
Alan Moore's a gateway drug to British authors. I'm so sorry.
Yeah. Don't, for the love of God, don't get Twitless started about British authors. He'll be here all day. We can have a whole discussion about everything wrong with comics dating right back to Alan Moore. So don't start him. It's like don't bring up Woodrow Wilson in front of me and you'll probably be okay. Once you got a couple of hours. I risk it myself for the sake of example, but I will try to restrain it. So Twitless, when you guys, if you feel like, I know you said when you keep doing it till it's not fun anymore.
Yeah.
But you think that when Super School, if it has an end day on it, do you feel like webcomics are something long term for you, or is that just something that's just another medium for story?
All right. So one of the best things about the webcomic has been its excellent practice. And so writing at least twice a week, if not more, to keep, writing strips and Taylor drawing them, because we both have our grandiose plans. He has, he's working, I think, right now on a point and click adventure video game. He really wants to get into that sort of game, and kind of telling stories through those types of mediums. And I'm working right now on a self-funded superhero comic, an actual, like, with actual pages, and it'll have like a cover and stuff. But it'll have words on it too. It'll be like an actual comic.
The Dead Tree Edition.
Yeah, exactly. So so I have these bigger dreams, but like as many authors do, but the webcomic was something that didn't take a lot of I guess facilities. It didn't take a lot of like you didn't need like printing and the whole like becoming the industry that you have to do when you actually try to make a printed product. You just need to have a website or even just a place to slap the thing up. And so I think webcomics are going to be... So the long-winded answer to your question is yes. I think webcomics are a long-term deal for me just because of the fact that I love keeping in the practice of it. And it's something that, like, as the two of us can get older and depending on whether or not our other projects and our grandiose dreams are successful, we look back on the fact that we have 4 years of Super School. We've just published over our 400th story strip. So it's an accomplishment. And it's one that is not extremely hard to do, as opposed to doing, I guess, formal, long form comics. So yeah, a webcomics is the long game, I think, no matter what.
Now, Carl, you are an upcoming artist. People are seeing you. You're getting a little commission work on stuff. Do you feel like for you, webcomics is going to be something you keep your toe into, or is that just something that you're using as a platform for now?
Likely. I think the thing is that even if by some miracle I manage to actually publish any of this stuff, the simple fact of the matter is that webcomics still make an excellent testing ground for ideas. Like, ultimately, at the end of the day, the brilliant things about webcomics is that you can just make up whatever you want and put it out there. And that's a rare opportunity. You don't, when you look at human history, like this day and age is probably one of the only times in history where something like that is actually afforded to us, where we could just make whatever kind of story we want and put it out there to the general audience to judge. It's a pretty wild thing when you think about it.
I
That
think
is
that's a
pretty
real
amazing.
factor too, the low barrier to entry that webcomics have provided for people. First of all, it's a place to really practice and hone your skills, to bring up your A game while you're getting feedback from people. But at the same time, if you have something to show, it's a really good place to do it, right? And
Exactly.
and there is a real trade over to real world for success for some people, right? I go back to we occasionally will teach a comics as art class with our local art center, and I teach the story part, and Barry teaches the art part. Right?
Cool.
Barry's one of our partners, who's the art director for our company, because we're a company. Anyway,
Wear it proudly.
very, very broadly speaking. But anyway, with it, one thing Barry likes to talk to people about when they're coming in, because it's people that have already had some artistic experience or whatever, but we really want people to focus on not if you've got technical skill, that's great, but comics is about the evocativeness of the stories, and that's one of those things that it's about getting the ideas and the narrative across more than it's about looking like Adam Hughes, right? So just
Right.
as an example, if you hate Adam Hughes, the example stands. Anyway, moving on.
No, but you got a point. I mean, you could have the best art, but it's always the stories that draws me in. I mean, I can accept a lot of like bad art as long as the story pulls me in. That's more important to me.
Yeah, that's what Chris and I were banking on, because our art, especially in the early days, was not good. But that's one thing that we talk about. One of the examples that Barry always brings up is Juan, the guy who does One Punch Man, right? And I don't know if any of you guys have ventured into his original One Punch Man. They make me look really good.
Interestingly enough, his Mob Psycho 100 webcomic was also pretty amateurish in art quality. Like, he improved over the years, but it was still extremely amateurish. And the funny thing is that was actually eventually published in volumes. And unlike One Punch Man, which got an actual artist and was redrawn professionally, Mob Psycho 100 still retains its original art, even in published book format. And I think that's interesting.
Yeah, that's it. I was unaware
Still
of that.
sells.
Yeah,
because it's just that funny.
Mom Psycho. Okay, writing this one down.
Mob Psycho 100. It's very Japanese, but it's not Japanese in the way one might immediately think. It's surreal. It's definitely very much the author's sense of humor.
You know what's really interesting? I was I don't even know why I did this, but I actually looked at the Sailor Moon, the original manga, and that thing is almost unreadable. Like, it is. I'm serious. Try it sometime. Like, the first couple issues of Sailor Moon, it's terrible. I'm sitting there going, how did this ever get anywhere? And it's because that concept in that cartoon just took it off. Sometimes it's getting that right lightning in a bottle concept and getting the right attention on it, and it sparks a phenomenon. Because, like I said, there was nothing special about that comic from any perspective. It was just that concept of the magical girl thing in the cartoon that just kind of took it forward. I mean, I would almost say the same for Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. I actually do enjoy some of the original comics, but I mean, I wouldn't say that they're necessarily anything to write home about in terms of overall quality. But that cartoon, man, that's a generation.
Yeah. I think with TMNT, there was definitely an aspect of lightning in a bottle, right place, right time, right number of the right kinds of inspiration that really kind of caught that on there. That's one of those things too. The Eastman and Laird, in getting their idea off the ground, took a lot of risks, right? because the barrier to entry at the time was just high. Like one of the reasons we jumped into webcomics in '05 was that the idea of printing comics and trying to get them in front of people, especially when we neither of us were artists, it was a situation where we would have to be, I mean, we'd have to put real cash money down when we did not have real cash money, right?
Right. I
Right.
really got to hand it to the artists or writers and stuff that did put out like a lot of these indie comics back then. You know, I mean, I've got some that I'm like, I can't even imagine them being web comics today, but somehow they did it. You know, they built up the money to get them printed and get them out there. So I kind of relish those comics a little bit more than, you know, the mainstream comics, because it's just a bit of passion there.
Oh yeah, and I think that's a big thing. But I think that also, and this isn't to take away from that at all, but just one of the things that I think is so impressive about the webcomic genre or media, I guess I should say, is just the fact that it's just so accessible.
Mm-hmm.
Now, how many people? Now we left Comic Genesis in '07. They were having server problems and we couldn't upload regularly, and so we just decided to start our own website, right? And we've been maintaining forceofgoodandevil.net since then, right? Sometimes I think that was a mistake. All of the little like communities around the services, they had people that were, you know, community members, and they had their, you know, their central hubs for going to stuff. I know back in Comic Genesis, you know, I met Josh Sortelli through there. I met not directly, just over the internet, but I followed Abby. What is her last name? Who did the Green Avenger?
Abby Lurkey.
Yeah. And Matt Johnson, who may be here in 10 minutes in Portland, and a bunch of folks that I had ended up running into online because of their comics, and that were in that same Comic Genesis community. And I knew some people that, you know, they settled over at Drunk Duck, and they had their own little community of webcomicers and fans who would follow things over there. And, you know, services today like Webtoon and Tapas have a similar kind of community of readers that are out there. And I think at least 3 of us here just have our own websites, right?
Right.
What do you... Tell us about your story. Why did you go? We'll start with you, Neil. How did you go about like finding a home on the internet, and what do you think about that?
You mean migrating away from Comic Genesis, or?
Yeah. Tell us about that.
Well, I had a chance to leave just because Comic Genesis was having trouble, and so was Drunk Duck. I was on both, and just having all sorts of trouble with both websites, and I got an offer from SGBY to move the comic over there because they have a much better. I'm hearing an echo myself. Sorry. They have a much better system for doing the comics. I actually like how I described earlier, how I can just like have huge batches of pages. I can just tell people where to start reading instead of just like having it on the index page day type thing. So that's the main reason those are the main 2 reasons why I left, is because the websites are just terrible, and I saw an opportunity to do a different system that worked better for what I was doing anyway, which is the batch system. I always worked off of a batch system.
Shoot.
Matt says he's here, but I don't see him, so I'm not sure how to get him in here.
One thing about the community aspect of both those websites is that I was always worried about what the ratio was of like readers versus actual other authors, the ratio of authors to actual readers. You know, sometimes I felt like the only people reading Decian were other comic authors, and I'm like, well, I want like people outside the community coming in to read it. And it was just like, if the people reading it are like the guy who does Pinky TA and like a bunch of those guys, it's like, I'm not really getting anywhere with this. I'm just kind of spinning my wheels. So I kind of looked at it as a way of escaping from that, hopefully.
Twitless, you guys do your own domain, right?
Yep. We're done.
Yeah. What was your thought process with deciding on that?
Oh gosh, it's been a while. What was my thought process? I wanted to be legitimate. I don't know. Yeah, I just it was kind of the sort of thing where it's like, if we're gonna in for a penny, in for a pound. And I will say that there is something neat about the fact that when you see the yearly bill, like when you're paying like a couple $100 a year for that, it definitely it helps incentivize you, because by golly, it's already cost me a lot of money to keep this thing running. I'm definitely going to get my money's worth out of it. So it has been helpful from that aspect. The aspect that it hasn't helped is I suck at marketing. And so for the longest time, I think it was the first year or so, year and a half, we had like no traffic, because I didn't know you were actually supposed to, do anything to actually market your website. So the only people who found us were those like out of those foreign like botters and spammers that would be like, hello, I can make your website for you because I looked up your domain name. Would you like to pay me money? So yeah. So the only thing we got was spam, and until we it was mostly spam until we joined the Collective of Heroes network, and then we started getting a lot more traffic, which was nice.
And that's one of those things that it's interesting, because it reminds me of the web rings from back in the day. And that probably dates myself, but everyone knows I'm old. So yeah. But before we move on, Matt Johnson, thanks for coming on.
Hello. Hope you all can hear me.
Yeah. So Matt is the creator of Cortland and Out at 5. And I'm going to we've asked everybody about their comics, and you're late.
Well, my ears were burning. I heard you talking about me there.
And you were going to be, but that's okay. So I'm just going to spend some time interrupting myself to talk, to let you have a little floor. Tell us about what got you into webcomics and why you're still doing
it. Wow, why am I still doing it? Well, you were talking about Comic Genesis a few minutes ago, which, when it did work, was not so much a webcomic hosting service as it was more of a dating website. So people were getting together in the forums and pairing up and having lots of drama. It was big soap opera there. So if you weren't on the forums on Comic Genesis, you really weren't there. But part of the fun was really actually the community that was built all around the comics, which I didn't discover until later, because I think I had no hosting service to speak of. I was just drawing comics for my own amusement for an e-zine called About This Particular Macintosh. And every week I just did a comic for them. And then eventually I stumbled upon a webcomic hosted on Keenspace, which is what it was called back then. And I thought, oh, hey, this could be a lot easier than trying to write my own HTML by hand with my text editor, which is how I did. That's how a lot of people did things back then. So
yep.
We got in there, and made it a lot easier to draw 100 comics and have them navigable on the internet. And that's kind of how it got started. But I mean, the whole reason why any of us do this, I don't know if anyone can really answer that. It's like, why do you climb a mountain? It's because it's there. And I think the only reason anyone does a comic is because they have a story they want to tell. And the only reason you keep doing it is because you're not finished yet.
What are you talking about? I'm in this for all the money.
Is there money in this?
I feel like I've been bamboozled.
Right.
I think I mentioned a while ago I signed up for the Brave Rewards program, thinking it was, and I actually thought it was successful because I was actually getting money from it. But no, zero BATs came from my comic. They all came from me just looking at ads on Brave, the web browser. So I still have yet to turn a profit of any kind with the comic, but I don't think that's why. If that's why we did it, I don't think any of us would be here. I think it's mostly just the fun of making something and telling a story with pictures.
Right.
It's really not much more. It's not much more complex than that.
So with I know with Cortland, you had a kind of a big story that evolved and changed and shifted, and you felt like you had to put a definitive end into that chapter of the story. That you've kind of taken on in a different twist with some of the side characters in Out at 5. I'm a big fan. Cards on the Table. I've read all of it like 3 times. So sorry to everybody else in the chat. Matt's the only person I've read all their stuff.
Well, I'm leaving.
I'm sorry. It's just the truth. But although I did read all of Crossover Lord, which
cool.
I enjoyed. Mostly. We're not talking about all that. But anyway, but with it is one of the things is with Out at 5, it's taken a couple of different tacks on it. But do you have a big story in mind for that, or are you just kind of writing as you feel?
Yes, the whole reason I kind of picked up where I left off is because I had sort of a bigger story in mind. Just to bring everybody else up to speed. In 2008, up until 2008, my comic had been sort of a combination of sci-fi humor relating to the Macintosh community and some other elements relating to graphic design and my daily job and that sort of thing. And then I decided to kind of shift the focus to more of a Dilbert daily gag kind of a comic for a while. And I liked doing that, but then somewhere around 2014, I looked back at the 6.5 years I did with Cortland and thought, there's a bigger story I'd like to wrap around this whole thing. And so I just started writing and saying, okay, let's go back to the very beginning of Cortland, look at all the stuff that happened, pick out some of the loose ends, try to make some of those make sense, because I left some little holes in the plot I wasn't too happy about. But in doing that, and this started, 6 years ago, I started thinking of a much bigger kind of a story, and it started taking it into the future, thinking, okay, where's this going to go? Because basic premise is that, there's a big conspiracy, big evil enemy presence that's been behind everything in the story so far, but I haven't even touched much upon that yet. So, like any good story, it'll probably never be finished. That's the sort of thing where if I need more content for future comics, I can keep picking at it. So I think Reese, you had a timeline that spanned from literally the creation of the universe up until several hundred years in the future or something.
We're up to 2010 is about where it is with our universe's timeline begins at the creation of the universe, and there's several thousand years that are virtually the same as our time, and then diverges drastically at 1939. Mm-hmm. But so.
And I have a similar sort of timeline for my own comic that ends basically when the characters are in their golden years. But I don't know exactly how far I'm going to get into that. I'll probably be retired myself if I ever get around to it.
One of the things that I really liked about Cortland, and I've talked about on stream before, is it's just I think you do a really good job, Matt, of seamlessly blending these crazy techno fantasy elements with the day in the life of these people as they go down to Havurunza. So for those of you who are not from Nebraska, Arunza is a local restaurant chain that serves cabbage burgers.
It's basically a sock filled with ground beef and cabbage.
Yes, really. It's delicious, but it's also very weird.
I love putting those little local bits of trivia in my own comic because to me it makes it more real. If you have, nobody's heard of Arunza outside of this state, so that's why I have to include it somehow.
Yeah,
but. Well, like you were saying, I've always struggled with my own comic between, am I going to go off the deep end with the weird sci-fi humor or the day-to-day, everyday, job-related humor? And I think recently I created a sort of a character like Alex Jones who basically explains everything that's happened in the most blunt way possible, and everyone is listening and thinking, oh, wow, this guy is nuts. He's talking about these evil alien androids who are trying to invade the world and take over everybody, and all the demons and different creatures taking over your mind control.
And no one would believe them, even though it's entirely what's happening.
Well, that's exactly it. The bad guys say, "Oh no, should we shut him up?" And they say, "Oh, don't do that. Everyone will think that he's credible."
That's
Let him talk.
That's one of the conceits of the story. In the same way that both Twitless and I stories are built upon the assumption that the government is actually funding schools to teach villains how to be better villains. we just have to assume that everybody knows their tax money goes to training supervillains, and somehow they're okay with that.
It's basically the school system as it exists today, anyway.
Well, yeah, that's
just reality.
Scathing social commentary.
That's actually a subtextual point in our storyline that we'll get to during their senior year. in spring break 2006, it all comes out. So there you go. There's a spoiler, right? For those like 6 people who have read all of my comic.
Are there any homeschool supervillains? That's what I want to know.
Me, I'm one of them.
That's a really interesting idea, Matt. That's not something you really tested all. We have homegrown supervillains, but I don't know if we have any homeschooled supervillains.
I can imagine a supervillain who's just not happy with the curriculum offered by the government and saying, we can do so much better on our own. We're going to form our own little curriculum here. We know exactly how evil is supposed to work. Government agents are just all amateurs.
Oh my goodness, that's amazing.
Every time you guys try to start a war, you just end up screwing everything up. We're going to cause real damage.
Okay, so Neo has in the chat has boiled this entire conversation down to its essential elements here. He's performing chat group alchemy.
No, just to answer your question, they're not turning the frogs into supervillains. They're turning them gay.
What if they're turning them into gay supervillains?
Yes.
I'll leave that to Marvel.
We're going to take over the world, and it will be fabulous.
That's just Milo.
Oh, okay. So yeah, I think. Sorry, let's see. Where were we at before I interrupted myself? I was asking Twitless about something.
Good luck.
And as a follow-up question, something else.
Well, I hadn't developed a follow-up question yet. So here's a little peel behind the curtain. Since I'm filling time because I don't remember what I was talking about. So I don't really plan much of these shows out. I come up with some basic general themes, and I let people riff off of each other and throw a little questioning in there so that we can go ahead and keep the ball rolling. That sometimes leads to very interesting tangents that people then talk to me about later. Why are you talking about, Franklin Roosevelt? I thought you were supposed to be talking about webcomics.
Did you mention Woodrow Wilson earlier?
I did mention Woodrow Wilson earlier. Yeah.
And I thought, that's the president. You mean the president, or is this a comic artist I haven't heard of?
No. Woodrow Wilson, the socialist bastard, KKK fronting son of a bitch. Wow, I really went off there. Sorry, guys. Sorry about that.
Get him started. Get him rolling.
He also created the Federal Reserve. Don't forget that.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah.
And this is something about what I'm going to mention this against my better judgment, since I already called him a son of a bitch. When Woodrow Wilson was at Princeton, he wrote a multiple volume version of the history of the United States that served as the outline for Birth of a Nation, the KKK recruiting film. And part of the reason he was so keen on it at the White House, and I believe it was showed 3 times there, was because it was based on his outline for his history of the United States.
Dang.
Now I have to find this. Was this a book that he wrote or a paper?
It's a multi-volume book about the history. It's like everything that Woodrow Wilson thought was important about the history of America.
So it's sort of like the Howard Zinn, but more Confederate.
Yeah. I think Howard Zinn may have used it as a reference too, but don't quote me on that. I might be wrong. But I think it's just a different spin on the same information, but I might be wrong. So don't quote me on that. Sorry, Neil. I went all political there for a second.
Oh, it's fine.
But in fairness, it's my show.
Right.
Back to webcomics. Actually, there's a question that comes up on there. Webcomics are notorious for self-congratulatory self-inserts. That's something that any of you guys have felt burdened by.
Oh, I literally killed my own self-insert. Because it bothered me. I mean, it wasn't intentional that I created him that way, but it happened. So I thought, I have to get rid of this guy now. And so he's
the only self. I'm sorry.
I was going to say, Matt, that was an epic death.
I guess the only self-insert was. I'm sorry.
But even in my removal of that character, Lou Prand described it as Cortland died for our sins. So, there you go.
Now, Doug, you were going to say?
Oh, I guess the only self-insert I did was a little parody on George Lucas back when the prequels were being made and stuff. So that was. Or are you talking about like a character that's more based on me?
Yeah. Self-insert is where you put yourself in the work.
Okay. Yeah, that's it. I did one April Fool's joke. They were gonna do George Lucas was gonna do a version of the Flying Ferret movie, and he was writing and directing it, and he completely brushed me aside, and so it was all prequel commentary. So
that's amazing.
Yeah, and he had Hayden Christensen play Flying Ferret, and of course, him being small when he was in the Darth Vader suit, and he had to look through the mouthpiece. And in my comic, he's looking through the emblem in Flying Ferret's suit. So,
and for those of you who have not seen Flying Ferret, he's a behemoth. He's a monster of a character.
Yeah.
So that's funny. Yeah, we've had in Forces. I've shown up. Chris and I have shown up a couple of times in the background. But never as our main characters. I think, of course, it's based on high school. We graduated, so I think that's always a part. Our experiences aren't necessarily too far away. You write what you know, kind of a thing. But I've never really felt the need to write myself into a character since I've been an adult. And I do find there are certain values that my characters, as they mature, I kind of will spot. Different value statements that reflect the journey that I went through. But I think that's another one of those things where, you write what you know. I learned how important being married is by being married. So if I write married characters, there's a real good chance that they're going to figure that out themselves.
Yeah.
It's kind of hard not to insert yourself into the comic. The real challenge, though, is exploring your own problems and knowing your faults and working those things into your character as well. Because a lot of comic authors do not do that.
Yeah,
it's like, what are you talking about? I'm the greatest person ever. Here's my character.
So I know we weren't going to get on the Brits, but. Dun. This is where I'm going to rant on Neil Gaiman and Grant Morrison for having the most transparent self-insert fan fiction that I've ever seen in my life. Does anyone remember Sandman, when he basically just made himself the Sandman at one point? He's wearing exactly the same clothes.
Oh,
and
yeah.
I'm Sandman. It's so transparent. He's written himself as the character, and it just my eyes rolled so far back into my head.
Yeah, and I think I think the issue a lot of it times comes from in webcomics that are maybe a bit clumsy with that is people that they try to work through their problems as the character rather than, you know, having dealt with their past and let their character go through it themselves. You know what I mean?
Oh my
So-
god! Yeah, you
Yeah.
see this way too much in a lot of webcomics. Way too much, and just some of it's so self-involved, and the minutia is unbelievable. There's so many webcomics I've turned away from because it's like I know where you're going with this. I know this
You
is
can
about
even
you.
see that in some contemporary, quote unquote, professional published comics as well.
Yeah, exactly.
Yep.
That's what I was just saying there.
Tom
I-
King. Tom King.
I keep thinking of more. Does anyone know Brian Talbot?
No.
Okay, he wrote the Adventures of Luther Arkwright, and it's the same thing. It's just like I'm just writing myself as this superhero who gets to overthrow all of society. So I think part of it has to do with how, like, so to focus specifically on webcomics, I guess I think is it Dominic Deegan that keeps coming to mind, right when I think about self-insert. But yeah, so it's like it comes down to the author, how the author treats his own ego, I guess. So if you have an author who's got a healthy enough ego where he can, like, you know, be self-deprecating or not take himself that seriously, I think that the self-insert character will not come across as obnoxious. If that same author has a self-insert character and he takes himself super seriously, that's when I think they cross the line into utterly, unbearable.
So, yeah, I totally agree.
I think that's a fair statement. And I think like I said, I think there's I just keep coming back to the idea that there's a big difference between using your past as a way of informing your story and using your story as a way to, you know, deal with your past. I think there's a catharsis that can happen in comics that's important from a creative standpoint. But I think sometimes people lean on their story rather than the other way around, right? And that's one of the things that, like, you know, coming back to Matt's story with Cortland, like, I think that even though, like, you felt constrained by that character, there is still a lot of great individuality within the character's arc. That I do think that maybe because you didn't start that way or whatever, but that kind of come across that. I think his death is memorable and it's important for the sake of the story.
Well, I think, but part of what helped in Cortland was that so much of it was based on stuff that was actually happening day by day. This wasn't like an idealized version of the work. Like, obviously the sci-fi stuff is made up, but the office humor, basically every one of my jokes in the office place in the comic is based on something that actually happened, which helped because this was, you mentioned catharsis. This was absolutely necessary for about 4 years of my life because such dumb things were happening on a daily basis that I needed a place to put them.
Right.
And it was so much easier to deal with the daily grind of office stupidity if I could just say, oh, this is going to make a great comic. I am going to just get at least 5 strips out of this.
And that is actually like a time-tested thing. Like, I don't know if you guys have ever read or heard interviews with the families of the people that wrote the Dick Van Dyke Show, but it was like a lot of the arguments that went on between the I can't remember the characters' names right now, Rob and Mary Tyler Moore's character. What was it? Anyway, they were from actual fights that people were having with their wives. I mean, like, the conflicts in the show were like, in fact, there was one, I was watching an interview with one of the writer's wives who was retelling a time where she and her husband were just going at it, just like hollering, screaming, fighting. And then all of a sudden she said something and the writer, the guy, his ears perked up and he started walking into the other room and she said, "You are not putting this in your stupid show."
That's great. You know you've got gold right there, yeah.
Yeah, and I mean, that's the thing. I think that you know, real life can definitely have an impact, and there's a long tradition of that sort of thing. But
That makes it genuine.
It's genuine. But it's also, I think that there's a point where, because once again, you're right what you know, right? There's no way my political opinion doesn't end up somewhere within the subcontext of forces of good and evil. So
now, it's interesting you mentioned that, though, because there's one thing that I've kept politics almost entirely out of my comic, but only because I know that my characters wouldn't talk that way.
Right.
The way I've written them is like, whatever their beliefs are in the comic, they're not mine. And if I started trying to insert some political opinion in there, I'd basically be using them as sock puppets.
Right.
And I've noticed there's this one comic called Phil Likes Tacos. It's been around for like a couple decades. Very long-running comic. And it's basically written as a daily newspaper strip, and I used to read it very frequently. And then I stopped for a couple of years, and I decided to check back in, and he has about 3 months of this anti-Trump spiel that seems to have come out of nowhere. And I thought,
2016 really broke a lot of people.
Well, I just read it and I thought, this is not what your characters are like. They're very happy, funny, they're happy-go-lucky gamer type people, and they're not. This is not your characters. So it's something I've tried consciously to avoid myself, because it's easy to do that, but your characters really come to life when you can tell there are things that they do and do not do.
Right.
You can't just, as the creator god of the strip, make them.
Right.
You also want your comics to be kind of like little evergreen too. You don't want this little pin mark. Oh, this was during the Trump era or the Reagan era, whatever. You kind of want a little evergreen aspect to it. That people look at it in the future and say, oh, that look back and say, oh, that was funny. Or that attributes to me. Or something like that, rather than being a timestamp.
And one thing what we've tried to do specifically with ours, and once again, when we started building our universe, we're both Chris and I were big Marvel and DC fans, and I was especially a huge DC fan. I love the idea of the alternate timeline, the alternate geography, the fake cities, all that kind of stuff. But one thing that we both felt that the biggest superhero comic universes had a problem with was the idea that it was always now, right? So eventually, like, you can't tell a story fast enough for as quickly as your characters change. And so because of that, if you put any kind of pins in it, suddenly, like, things don't make sense anymore. So if World War II happened, well, suddenly you have to make those characters that fought, or were alive at World War II, super old, and yet not if they're going to interact with your characters today, right?
Right. Yeah.
You can only stretch credulity so far, and it's like the Magneto situation, right? Right. There's been a big talk from Marvel. Are they going to change Magneto's history and his background, and even his race, so it makes sense? Because World War II was too far long ago, right? It was too far away for the stories happening today, and they can't just go back and be just like, so we have a fixed timeline in our universe, right? And so for a long time, we never told anybody what year Forces of Good and Evil happened in.
Yeah.
It was all very nebulous. It was the now. But it's always been 2004, 2005, right? And then we did a story we called Spring Break 2005, and we peeled the curtain back and said, this is the pin, this is when it happens. And so that we have other stories that taken all of our other stories in our anthologies or whatever have a timestamp on them to know when it's happening. So if you really care, you can say, oh, I've got my copy of the printed anthology, and this story happened in 94, and this story happened in 76, and this story happened in whatever. You can kind of put it together that way. But we wanted to make sure that it was something that our timeline veers off of real time. So, it's not, it doesn't affect regular politics, your regular histories. You don't have to, have the same opinion of Franklin Roosevelt as I do to appreciate what goes on, because Franklin Roosevelt may never have been a president in our universe. The Vietnam War didn't happen. Things like that, because it's super different. And we did that intentionally so that we could maintain some of that aspect of the evergreen. so that it's an alternate thing that people can go ahead and dig into, and yet gives us the chance to see people live and die and have children and legacy and all those things that I think are super cool. So
yeah, so that kind of stuff I wouldn't mind for like Batman. Wouldn't it have been cool if Batman was getting older and he had to have someone to take his place, and he's older and guiding. And I don't know. I know a lot of people like having Batman, Bruce Wayne. He's young, and he can still acrobatic and all this stuff. I think one of the best things to happen to Batman was his back broke by Bane. I thought it was just some really interesting storytelling. Someone to replace him. Like as that was his name, Azrael, yeah, and stuff like that, and Robin to step in and stuff like that. I mean, I as a growing older reader, would have been nice to have the characters kind of grow with you. I think you could do it. You can do it. You can make it interesting.
Well, and I mean, and DC had its sacred cows of things that weren't going to change. But growing up in the 90s, there was, coming up in the 90s and early aughts, there was a lot of, they made a big deal about this concept of legacy. And of course, that the heroic legacies kind of started back in the 70s when they relaunched the All-Star comics. You have Power Girl, and you have the first version of Huntress, and all that kind of stuff. And then with the throughout the 80s, you had the Infinity Squadron and Roy Thomas' books and all those kind of things.
Right.
And that was part of the fuel that fed my love of that concept and that trope, along with Ron Fortier's Green Hornet from Now Comics.
Right. Yeah, that was good stuff.
Oh man, I'm going to brag a little bit. I've been able to become friends with Ron. He lives in the Front Range, and so he's in the same con circuit that I go to. So I've been able to become friends with him. I need to have him on the show sometime, but that would be fun. But yeah.
Nice.
Anyway, but yeah, so I've gotten to pick his brain about all of that kind of stuff. It's been fun. He's a very, very colorful guy. But yeah, so that idea of the heroic legacy is something that I just love, and so we hard coded that into our universe because we wanted that whole thing to do. In fact, our hero student Chad Little in Force of Good and Evil finds out in the course of his junior year that his mother used to be a superhero before he was born, and that his grandfather was a superhero in the Golden Age. And so he discovers that he's part of a legacy that his mother kept secret from him. And why does that happen? And that all plays up in the story of his summer between his junior and senior year.
Well, I better keep reading your comic there. I got to find that.
Yeah. I think it's worth reading, but of course I wrote it. So
right.
I got to say, I didn't write all of it. Chris and I co-wrote the first half of it, and then I've pretty much written the second half. So there you go.
Cool.
Not quite 100% on that, but it's average is kind of something. Anyway, but yeah. So that's something that I think is just cool, and I think it allows like you were talking about, the idea that the comic has, hopefully my comic has staying power because it's not tied to who's mad at who for being president.
Right. Yeah.
And I think we've all had people we're mad at for being president, one way or another. So Neil, with Dacian, is there any are there any elements of the story? I know you were talking about that you hated the pacing in the first issue or first couple issues. Are there any other personal problems that you felt with your craft as it's evolved?
I guess just my own personal limitations. When you go on a hiatus a lot, you also kind of lose a little bit of the edge. So I've always had a problem with like backgrounds, and I'll tell you one thing that I have a hard time with that kind of plays off the subject of what you were just talking about is as time goes by and things change in the real world. For me, it's not politics, but it's technology. Telephones and TVs and everything. Like suddenly, like one day your characters are watching like a tube TV, and then the next like maybe 3 issues later they have like a flat screen, and that's really frustrating. It's something I never thought about is just how fast technology moves along.
Yeah, that's one thing I specifically noticed with them, because it's so based in Apple technology. As you can see, the Apple system's changing through time in the system.
Right.
Oh yeah. But the characters use Macintosh computers, and between 2000 and 2010, they changed pretty radically from the iMac to now they've gotten a little more subdued now, but they had some radical changes.
Oh yeah,
the last decade or two.
Not
to mention cell phone.
Sometimes I think it should just go totally futuristic and just make up technology. They just have like a sheet of glass in their pocket that has a screen on it for somehow. Don't even explain it. It's just like magic technology from the future. It's not from today.
That's what Disney did with the Iron Man stuff. Like, I mean, everything in Iron Man is so ridiculously like impossible that it's supposed to be like next gen of next gen's next gen. So, the 3D holograms and all that kind of stuff that like is physically impossible, but at least it doesn't seem like it's old now.
Yeah. Right to the Dick Tracy watch. You remember those?
Oh man,
the wrist radio.
Yeah, those are awesome.
Iconic bit of old technology for the future.
Old. What the future used to look like. There's a gag in a children's video that the future is white. It's been white since the 70s. Before that, it's chrome, and now it's white. And I think it's fairly accurate, and as long as even today, if the future isn't on fire, it's probably white. So that's something that joke's about 10 years old, and that still holds up. So, has anybody else had issues with trying to future-proof their comic at all? I think that's a fun idea.
No.
Of course, we run around because it's 2005. So it's the most interesting thing for us is going back to like if we want to write a piece of technology in at whatever time frame. Now, of course, our alternate history, like aliens invaded in like the 60s. So the 50s and 60s, late 50s, early 60s. So like we have alien technology as part of our milieu within our universe. Mm-hmm. So there's like flying cars and all that kind of stuff next to like old muscle cars. So we get to play with that a little bit, but because we put pins in it, and especially because our main comic takes place in rural Wisconsin, right? So things are a little backward there because it's rural Wisconsin, and so like maybe 2 people in town have got flying cars and they've never been in strip yet. And like we have one gag that we did with our last villain story where Greg mentions he's got a cell phone and what a novelty it is because not everybody has a cell phone in 2005 still, not every high schooler has a cell phone in 2005, even though like a cell phone in our universe could easily access like the satellites or whatever. It's a little different, but but like I said, because we've got our time fixed, we don't have to worry about technology quite the same way. And then if there's something that's a little anachronistic, well then that's okay because aliens.
This isn't the part which you were asking, but the one big future-proofing problem I had with my comic is transferring it to something in print, or at least something that wouldn't be suitable for the web, because I keep high-res versions of my comic, but it wasn't until more recently that I thought, the font size is way too small in all the dialogue. If I printed this out in a standard book of some kind.
Right.
And so I don't know if that's something any of you consider. I mean, the beauty of doing things on the web is you can do all sorts of things that print doesn't need to worry about. The length of the strip or how large it is, and as long as it looks good on the screen, and even if it doesn't, people can zoom in. But then I think I was trying to create. I was thinking of creating like a print version of my comic for the last several years, and on 8.5 by 11 paper, stacked 4 strips to a page. It's really small. And so suddenly I'm thinking, okay, now I haven't even thought about this before. I basically picked a size for the strip and ran with it. And now I'm thinking, if I wanted to turn this into a book, what am I going to do now? I have thousands of strips. I'd have to change the font size in all of them, and it might not even fit.
Right.
Well, I think you probably need to do format. I mean, I think you'd have to do actually, hang on a second. I have an example. Give me just a minute here. Okay. Talk about what you're saying. We'll be right there.
I don't know if any of you...
I'm sorry. Go ahead.
I was going to say, I was looking at several different on-demand print services online. They all have their own custom templates. They all have a very specific list of sizes. And I remember looking, I think it was, it was like, what's it called? Blammo? Something like that?
Kablam, probably.
Kablam, yeah, that was it.
Yep.
And they did a great job, but I mean, the size, is very limited number of sizes for their books.
And sometimes that depends on what kind of machines that they have and stuff. I know that my buddy Rico, who did the Warehouse Tales from Vacation Land, which is an awesome comic about cute fuzzy animals in prison.
I've read that.
Yeah, it's great stuff. But he got his printed at Comics Wellspring in Michigan, where we've got some stuff printed there too. And they printed it on a regular size paper, and then it was a different format, so they just cut the tops of the pages off. So rather than cutting them where they normally cut them, they cut them down. So they ended up with a book that's like 4 by 6 or whatever. No, it'd be 6 by 8 instead of being 6 by 10, right? Roughly. But it worked really well for them. But with something like that, I would think that for yours, the strips ones would probably have to fit in something like this.
Yes.
Right? Where you need something that's got the squatty look to it. And that would mean you need to, something with that. So, some of that's depending on finding a printer that'll do it. I know, we got our little Ashcan comics. I either print them on a photocopier at Staples or something like that, or there's a small print house that a gal in town runs that will do stuff for us custom, because she's super friendly and gives us really good price on it. So if I don't want to fold and staple them all myself, I'll give her a little extra money.
Saddle stitching.
Oh yeah. I've got a stapler, so we do a lot of our ash cans for cons and stuff just all by hand.
Yep.
We'll get the covers color printed, and then the interiors are just photocopies. And we'll sell
I work
them
at a print shop. Yeah, I work at a print shop, so got a higher end color copier, and I printed several issues of Flying Ferret for cons and stuff, and did a really nice job. And nice to be able to do it myself, so I know, that it'll be done right. So.
It can be a real fun thing at cons too, because you go in there, and if you're still working on it, people will be like, "Oh, well, what are you doing?" And I'm like, "Oh, I'm making a comic right in front of you." And you can hand it all over to them, and then be like, "Oh, this is cool." And if they're really generous, slide a little green piece of paper back to you, so you can have this green piece of paper, and I'll take this green piece of paper. So. Neil, do you have any aspirations to move into physical media?
I've thought about it. A lot of my earlier pages are at 200 DPI, which is not quite adequate. So I don't know how I would. I don't know how I would handle that. I've wanted to, but I just. I think it would be a problem with a lot of those older pages. I've thought about Actually, I have had printed stuff of like newer stories. I appeared in one of the Drunk Duck anthologies, and actually they're doing another one. I should check on that. And I was also in one of the. I think I was in a Comic Genesis one. Yeah, I was. It was for Free Comic Book Day a long time ago. I think I would have to do like shorter stuff. What?
I'm just curious how long ago. I actually put together one of those books.
Oh, I think it was like 2006, 2007.
Yeah, that could have been one of
Yeah,
mine.
it was.
Huh. Anyway, I was just curious.
Yeah, it was quite a while ago.
Yeah. We started, we had in 07, we published our first and of two so far anthologies. They're all in our universe. Each of them have 7 stories, and that are just black and white, on them. And we've got we'd say we try to sell them as big books full of little stories, and just trying to be a little teaser in there. But it was really funny too, because when we first, I've told the story before, so those regulars who listen, you have to you have to just deal, I guess. But with it, when we first put it together, we didn't have access to a big bed scanner, right? So we took all of the pages and photo reduced them down from a photocopier smaller, and then we could scan them in smaller size. And one particular story lost a lot of its detail in the ink work in the first printing that we did, and it was just what the technology allowed, well, when we went through our third printing, we went through and were able to rescan those pages on a big bed scanner, and then reduce them electronically. And our new editions of that have just a lot cleaner lines, and it was personally satisfying on 2 levels. One is a story I wrote, so it looks a lot better, and the second of all, my wife did the inks on it, and she was so much happier that like her hard work wasn't just being smudged away through the reduction, that it made life a lot happier at home.
That's good. Gotta please the wife. Yeah.
She resigned herself to it. It's like, that's just what it is. But technology had increased just so much in the availability to it. It's one of those really interesting things about it, just how much it went on. I remember that when we started, the standard was 200 or 300 DPI was what printers could print, and now they can easily print at 600, and they don't even bat an eye at it.
Yep.
And so all our old files are 300. We thought we were really something special. And so, of course, for the web, it doesn't really matter. But our print stuff, our new, we're working on a book right now, and it's full color, and the files are enormous because they're all 600 DPI pages and everything. But it's because that's just what we're looking at. But yeah, that's one of the things we're talking about. Webcomics lowering that barrier to entry for people, but even the availability of technology for people getting into making comics is just so much more accessible. Print on demand shops, and you don't have to have have 500 copies of something to get a print run like you used to, and all that kind of stuff. So
yeah. Yeah, and it's amazing the number of print comics that are out there. Just throw a rock and you get somebody with a print comic.
So, Twitless, have you guys talked about taking Super School off the web, or is that just going to stay there?
What do you mean by taking it off?
I mean, doing the print version.
Maybe, I don't know. I think I want to get more further along first. You have to have a certain amount of strips before it's even worth it. And so, because I think you need to put it. I did a rough count once, and it was I think I needed 300, I think, to make a decent collected edition. And I can't just add in the middle of a storyline. So yeah, I'm not exactly sure how I want to approach that. It's also going to be a lot of work. So part of me goes, is it going to be worth it for me to put all this together and then no one will buy it? So
Right.
time will tell. I don't know. I'm open to it.
Carl, I haven't asked you anything in a while. When you're working with Matt on Dragblade, do you guys have like a big end game plan for that story at all, or is he just what are his goals?
He actually does have an ending plan for it, and I can't spoil any of it, but let me just say it's a pretty spectacular idea for an ending. I like the way it's going.
Awesome.
He has a lot of plans for like future story arcs and everything. It's actually kind of incredible how much of this story he already kind of had down.
Right. Well, he was going to take that originally, just do it himself too.
Yep.
That was something that he had wanted to pursue, and then didn't feel like he had the wherewithal to make it happen on his own. So I was really the first time I met him, I could tell just that he's a super creative guy. So I'm very glad about that.
Another thing is the world. Like initially, I assumed it would just be okay. It's like it's like medieval times, but weird. Actually, no. It's a really interesting hodgepodge of ideas and aesthetics ranging from fantasy to science fiction to every other genre under the sun, and it's been kind of a pleasure to see it sort of come about.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I read the first issue and started into the second. I haven't finished it yet, but he's just the level of zaniness, of clever zaniness in Dragblade is impressive. It is super impressive.
It's gonna get weirder.
So, Doug, with Flying Ferret, are you looking at doing a print edition of that at all, or is that one just for the pixels?
Well, there was at one point intention. I did print on my own the first issue, and then I did jump ahead for another convention, issue number 23. I don't know why I did that, but it just seemed to work out. But I don't know. I think that's kind of not a thing anymore. I think it's gonna just stay on the internet, and that'd be it.
And of course, you're involved in at least one other print only project as well.
Mm-hmm.
Movie Men. We talked about that when we first started up, which is a crazy fun story. I don't know if any of you guys had a chance to either get the campaign, or I think it's available for sale on the Wicked comics store, right?
Wicked Publishing. I think it is now. Yeah.
You can actually just go buy it direct.
Yep.
But I just think that was a fun 20-page book. And you're working on the follow-up, yeah?
Yeah, all the art's done for it. I still have to letter it and stuff, but Jeremy hasn't given the go-ahead for that. I think he's still writing dialogue or something for that one. So that one. If you thought the first one was fun, the second one is just as fun as the first. It's just pretty wild. Yeah, he's got a good imagination. He knows how to write some fun stuff there. So it's very, very stuff that I think kids should be picking up. It's very. If I was a kid again, I definitely would pick this comic up, and it's what we need nowadays. I mean, we're the older audience. Where are the young ones picking up comics? It's kind of a little sad to not see that. I mean,
I think some of that's distribution. We've actually talked about this on the show here before. I think some of it's distribution. I think some of it's that people. I think a lot of kids are buying comics, but they're not getting in it like the comics like we think of as comics.
Right.
They're picking up manga. They're picking up the Scholastic books at the school or the Target or whatever. It's just not at the shop, not at the spinner rack, because there are no spinner racks.
No.
I know. I got started into reading the funnies in the paper, and then eventually got into the grocery stores and to look for my DuckTales and Batman and all that kind of stuff. But we just don't have the same kind of market for that. And I think some of that has been replaced in some ways by the webcomic too. There are a lot of people reading webcomics that are creators, but I think there's a lot of people that just read them for their own sake too. I think it's a matter of seeking that out. But we did talk a little bit about being really bad at marketing earlier. And I know that I am terrible at marketing. I don't know how many people read my comic right now, but I know it's not as many as I want.
And that almost has to become like a full-time job. I can completely understand, print comics, just having different departments for this and that. One person doing it is such a incredible task. A lot of us just want to do the creative part. We don't want to mess with this promotion and marketing and stuff. But it's a necessary. I don't want to call it evil, but it's a necessary aspect, and I got to be better at it.
One thing that Comic Genesis did really well unintentionally was they made cross promotion of comics very, very easy on their platform. And they still do have a rotating ad banner on their homepage that just picks a comic at random and puts it out there. I think they might have a couple other little pogs or circular icons for just putting people's work out there on their homepage. And I think since social media has come to dominate everything, there hasn't really been a replacement for something like that.
Right.
I mean, if your comic was hosted on Comic Genesis, people who go to the homepage just looking for something to read have had multiple options. I mean, they could find your comic by searching for it, or they could look at the list of most popular comics, and if you were lucky enough to be on the first couple of pages, they could find you pretty easily. And since moving off Comic Genesis, I haven't had nearly the kind of traffic I did when I was there. And
I like having the control of having my own domain and everything. And I know that it's I'm not depending on somebody else's system. It's just ours. That's nice. But there is definitely not the same kind of environment and network about that. And I've been thinking about checking out like Webtoons. And maybe doing a mirror of some of our stories over there or something like that. And I know, Doug, you're on there, and I'm trying to remember, Dragblade's on there as well, right, Carl?
Yes, Dragblade is a webtoon.
So, do you feel like you get a good amount of traffic on there for that, or is it just a wasteland of people throwing webcomics up there?
Thus far, we've been getting some decent traffic on Webtoon.
Yeah, likewise.
Especially for a nobody comic that no one knows about. The amount of traffic we have gotten for something that, technically speaking, shouldn't even really be seen at all. Especially considering the fact that it's not really in addition to the hurdle of it kind of being a genre in of itself, due to mixing so many genres, a lot of the genres in question aren't even immensely popular on these kinds of sites. What are the web comics that really get a lot of traffic? Well, they're typically simple gag-a-day, relatable content type things about anxiety or stress or whatnot, or the romance comics. So the fact that a comic that is absolutely nothing like that, and is a weird mixture of a bunch of genres, has gotten a decent amount of traffic. It's gotten at least around 390 people read it so far. I'd say that's pretty good.
Yeah.
Not to mention, its uploading tools are actually really, really convenient.
Right. The only thing is you're stuck with their theme and their colors, that surround your comics.
That's pretty much the only gripe I could possibly have with it.
I was gonna say gamer comics tend to do really well too.
Yeah.
Now, this is a total side note, but there is it is weird to me. It is weird to me how popular gamer comics continue to be 20 years after their creation.
Right.
I know gaming is continuously popular, but it's in terms of the comics, there's such a niche thing. It's wild to me. That's just wild.
Well, gamer comics have kind of the kind of gamer comics that existed like around the early 2000s. I don't really think they exist anymore. Like when I think of a gamer comic nowadays, it is kind of different than stuff like Control Alt Delete was. But yeah, the fact that that specific kind of subject matter still has staying power is kind of interesting.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, Chris's first comic that he did, Chris Lawton, my co-founder, was basically a penny arcade clone.
Yeah, I have to say Penny Arcade.
Yeah, very much like that, but it kind of had its own little like pocket of nerd flair to it, where it wasn't like Penny Arcade, but it was like Penny Arcade. It's called The Adventures of Seth and Murphy, and I ended up actually convincing him to resurrect some of those characters in a story that I did a couple of years ago as side characters for an overall mission, and it was a lot of fun. I got to revisit his thing, and it was still, I think some of the jokes still held up pretty good, being very dated about what was going on in the world in 2003. Halo 2 coming out, and the fan, what's the name of that movie?
Halo 2.
All that kind of stuff. But it was.
That's
fun.
my generation, Halo 2.
Yes. You would have been a very small person.
Yeah, but that's what the kind of stuff that my generation was like raised on as far as video games are concerned.
So, but yeah, so that was well. Then, if you want to read a comic that involves somebody conniving their way into getting a copy of Halo 2, The Adventures of Seth and Murphy is still out there on Comic Genesis. So,
might have to give that a look.
So, but yeah, I kind of convinced Chris to put that on hold to do Forces a little bit. So, and it never got finished, but that's okay. So, well, guys, this has been just about at 2 hours. This has been a lot of fun. I want to thank you guys so much for coming on. Before we go, I want to give everybody a chance to kind of let people know what they've got coming up and kind of sell themselves a little bit. Neil, since you're right next to me on the thing, why don't you go first?
Okay, it's Decian.com, Decian Superhero Webcomic. I'm always threatening to come back, saber rattling. It'll happen eventually, just when you least expect it. I'll be back. Just sexy girl fun. That's one aspect of the comic I never mentioned, is basically me being a pervert and drawing hot chicks. That's kind of what started the whole thing. That's really all I got at the moment.
All right.
Yeah, it is in fact a comic about a sexy girl that hits things really hard.
That sounds up my alley.
Yeah. And there's little like bits of like Eastern philosophy that are tucked between the punches, if I remember right.
Kinda. I kind of stumbled upon that by accident, and I don't even know how much of that I really like being in there. Like, apparently Decian is like one letter off from being some sort of existential philosophy that I don't quite understand. So it's like, oh, that was something I didn't anticipate at all. And of course that I always get, I do tend to get cross traffic from that. So people come to my comic, it's like, what the hell is this? It has nothing to do with this.
It just kind of made the Matrix by accident.
Yeah, it's like, oh man.
And of course, and like I said, the big crossover with Mind Mistress and the Green Avenger and Lightbringer.
Yeah,
and
that was interesting.
Yeah, that was a whole thing. It's it reads decently for being a giant crossover webcomic thing. So,
Yeah, we had to really work at like not making it just a bunch of characters come together and beat up a bad guy. It's like no, we have to actually have a story and decide how the characters are going to interact. Like certain characters, I'm not going to say who, but certain characters in that comic stop talking after a little while and have nothing interesting to say.
we'll leave it at that. Twitless.
Yeah.
Hey, what's up?
Close some words, man. Close some words.
I screen shared.
Oh, yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
Hang on. I remember that.
Because I don't. Just pictures. All right. So this is my comic. This is superschool.com. So a superhero and supervillain high school gag comic. And we update twice a week. Right now we're doing a story with all our side characters because half the fun is making up superhero characters and making my artist draw them. So I'll just spin up new characters for situations. I feel someone mentioned the Tick earlier because they did that a lot too, where they just invent new characters constantly. So we decided we need to finally do something with a bunch of them that we'd invented and only used like twice. So that's kind of what we're doing right now. Feel free to check us out. Like I said, it's a lot of fun.
Cool. Okay. Carl.
Currently, I've already plugged Dragblade.
Yes.
So I guess I will plug that again. Check out Dragblade on Webtoon.
And eventually, the link will be in the description, but it's not right now. So that I also really encourage people to check out his other comic, Holgrave, which I think is on Tapas, right?
Yeah.
How do you spell that?
Holgrave, Hullgrave.
There you go. And it is like a steampunk fantasy kind of a fun thing. It's great. It's it's brilliant. I know you were talking about feeling like it was weighed down with not getting the narrative as tight as you wanted it, but I'm telling you, man, like tonally, it's so much fun.
I'm glad people like it. I will either continue that or redo it eventually. I was thinking, in addition to another project I've been working on behind the scenes, well, not even really behind the scenes, just I haven't done anything aside from drawing characters and coming up with concepts for it that takes place in the same universe as Holgraves.
Yeah.
Cool.
So, Doug, you're up, man.
Yeah, I've got Flying Ferret, of course, on Webtoons. I've got another comic that I do there called Slammer. That's kind of a futuristic super villain prison on the moon. There's a big mystery behind it, and one character's got to try to figure it out. And there's, I hope people check that one out. I've got a lot of good feedback on that one. And then, other than that, I do a little comic strip called True North. You find that on Facebook. I haven't done that a while since the whole COVID thing, so that's kind of on hold. But yeah, that's what you'll find from me.
Matt.
Well, you can find my comic at outat5.com, and I update twice a week. And I will keep doing that until I burn through my buffer of comics. I've been keeping it pretty much on schedule, so hopefully that'll continue for the foreseeable future. I've only taken a couple rare hiatuses over the last decade or two, mostly when I just completely run out of ideas.
And it's my show, so I have the last word.
Of course.
You follow forcesofgoodandevil.net, which I have a banner ready for. Look at that.
Ooh,
I had one for Holgrave and for Super School, but I didn't use those at the time. Anyway, I also have one that talks about my technical difficulties. Look at that. Anyway, so forcesofgoodandevil.net, I've pitched it. It's fun. Panic at the Ren Fair is the third part of Plain History, where Chad discovers his mother's superhero past and confronts her about it. At a Renaissance fair that is doubling as a extra credit event for the superhero high schools. And I get it's a crossover with a bunch of different hero schools in our universe. Plus, I also was able to borrow a few characters from the sadly defunct webcomic called Broccoli Top that ran on Comic Genesis like in 04. I happened across this comic. I really liked the concept. I was able to find and reach out to the creator and let me borrow his characters. And so they're some of the large cast of characters. It was super amount of fun. However, I did have something like 28 characters in the story. So there's a lot of juggling that happened in the 40 pages.
Wow. Kudos to you.
It's ridiculous. I don't know what the heck I was thinking.
Gotta love those challenges.
But that's part of why I'm taking a break from Forces when the story's done. I am working on some other stuff in the background. You can check out, there are some Ideal Comics mini comics that are available for download over at the Comics Underground. You can find more exclusive content on our Patreon. And we will be having some more announcements in the next few months as we get some projects done. So, including, I don't want to get into all that, but yeah. So check us out there. And for those of you guys who are interested, tuning in next week, Luke, I do not remember his last name. He was on a few months ago on one of our Christianian comic streams, and just started a thing called Terraform Comics with him and Eric. I forgot his
Luke
last
Stone?
name too. Luke Stone.
Yeah.
Is coming on next week to talk about the new company and what they're doing with that.
Cool.
And then I think the week after that, I need to get everyone together, but I think we're doing another old guys stream about the cost of being a long-term comics fan and is it worth being hated over. So that's in the weeds yet. That's not a guarantee. But Luke Stone next week. And maybe some other guys too. But thanks for tuning in. Those of you guys who were able to stick around. And for all of you guests, for Neil, for Twitless, for Carl, for Doug and Matt, thanks for coming on and spending this couple of hours, John, about the defining trait of my free time. And knowing that we all share that pain. So, anyway, guys, thanks for tuning in. And
Thank you. Have a good night.
Thank you.
Thank you. See you, everybody.
Bye, everybody.